This U.S. Air Force report graphically outlines the military's desire to exploit and manipulate the weather for the purposes of war by the year 2025. According to one of the most harrowing lines in this report, quote, "Weather modification is a force multiplier with tremendous power that could be exploited across the full spectrum of war-fighting environments."
Man-made global warming is no longer just a theory about climate. It is the defining moral and political cause of our age. It is presented in the media as having the stamp of authority of an impressive international organization.
From the IPCC,
the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC.
I've often heard it said that there is a consensus of thousands of scientists on the global warming issue and that humans are causing a catastrophic change to the climate system. Well, I am one scientist, and there are many that simply think that is not true.
The final conclusions are politically driven.
This claim that the IPCC is the world's top 1,500 or 2,500 scientists, you look at the bibliographies of the people and it's simply not true. There are quite a number of non-scientists.
And to build the number up to 2,500, they have to start taking reviewers and government people and so on, anyone who ever came close to them. And none of them are asked to agree. Many of them disagree.
Those people who are specialists but don't agree with the polemic and resign, and there have been a number that I know of, they are simply put on the author list and become part of this 2,500 of the world's top scientists.
People have decided you have to convince other people that since no scientist disagrees, you shouldn't disagree either.
Climate scientists need there to be a problem in order to get funding.
We have a vested interest in creating panic because then money will flow to climate science.
It's become a great industry in itself. And if the whole global warming farrago collapsed, there'd be an awful lot of people out of jobs and looking for work.
There's one thing you shouldn't say, and that is, this might not be a problem.
If you go to page 119 of the president's budget, he's anticipating generating $646 billion in new tax revenue from this bill. So clearly the president expects this bill to generate $646 billion in new taxes that even his own budget director has said would be passed on to consumers. So you mustn't have been listening to our testimony that we've had for the last few days with dozens of experts that have come in who have given completely different views.
Well,
I would encourage you to go back and look at the testimony this committee's heard. Dude, we're talking about that can export millions of jobs out of our economy, out of our country, and testimony's been given just to those numbers. And so we're talking about a serious consequence that there would be on this country. The carbon would be emitted, but it would be emitted in China and India, and the jobs would go to China and India. Do you want to
man-made global warming pollution causes global warming.
It's my understanding that back in 1997, when you were vice president, Enron's CEO, Ken Lay, was involved in discussions with you at the White House about helping develop this type of policy, this trading scheme. And is that accurate? Is it inaccurate? It's been reported.
I don't know, but I met with Ken Lay, as lots of people did, before anybody knew that he was a crook.
And clearly you can see why so many of us are concerned about turning over this country's energy economy.
I didn't know him well enough to call him Kenny Boy.
You knew him well enough to help devise this trading scheme, and obviously we know what Enron and these big guys on Wall Street like Goldman Sachs, and I know you've got interest with Goldman Sachs.
No.
These people, well, that's been reported. Is that not accurate?
No, I wish I did.
I'm saying that there are going to be big winners and big losers in this bill, and I think that should be noted, that companies like Enron helped come up with this trading scheme that would
Enron.
I don't know if this is true or not, that some scientists are trying to figure out a way to block the sun to try to slow down global warming?
Yeah, it's a measure of the feeling of desperation that some of them feel.
Are they really thinking they could do that?
Well, some of them are seriously proposing, and I think it's completely nuts.
Yep.
You put another kind of pollution, sulfur dioxide, up to orbit, cover the atmosphere. The sky won't be really blue in the way it is now anymore, but it would block out some of the sun's heat so that we wouldn't have to take the difficult steps to stop spewing all this global warming pollution into the atmosphere. And of course, there are a lot of problems with what they're proposing.
You could actually spray sulfuric acid in the stratosphere 20 kilometers over our head and use that to stop the planet warming up in a kind of ugly tech fix.
You can spray something into the atmosphere to change.
Spray pollution into the atmosphere to stop it warming.
How do you do this?
You'd start with a fleet of modified business jets and say 20,000 tons of sulfuric acid into the stratosphere every year. And each year you have to put a little more. And this doesn't, in the long run, mean that you can forget about cutting emissions. We will need to rein in emissions.
We'll get to it eventually. But in the meantime, we're shrouding the Earth in sulfuric acid.
So people are terrified about talking about this because they're scared that it will prevent us cutting emissions.
Right, and also that it's sulfuric acid.
We put 50 million tons of sulfuric acid in the air now as pollution, and it kills 1 million people a year worldwide.
Okay, but it'll be better if we put more in.
We're talking about 1% of that.
1% more, we're just killing 10,000 more people.
You can do math.
What happens to the sulfuric acid after it's sprayed? Does it just stay up there?
No, it rains down, but it's a tiny addition to what we're already doing.
Is there any possible way this could come back to bite us in the end?
It actually turns out to be an old idea. This was known since President Johnson.
You ever look at those planes up there? They have contrails behind them. Maybe all those planes with the contrails, maybe they're actually spraying chemicals into the atmosphere right now and Uncle Sam isn't telling us.
Seems extremely unlikely.
That the United States is not telling something to its citizens? That seems extremely likely to me. Read the newspaper. I think they might have your idea already.
This geoengineering idea in its simplest form is basically the following. You could put fine particles, say sulfuric acid particles, sulfates, into the upper atmosphere, the stratosphere, where they'd reflect away sunlight and cool the planet. There's lots of mystery in the details, and there's some bad side effects, like it partially destroys the ozone layer, and I'll get to that in a minute, but it clearly cools down. And one other thing, it's fast. I guess the thing I haven't said about this is it is absurdly cheap. It's amazing how we can affect the planet. The one thing about this is it gives us extraordinary leverage. This improved science and engineering will, whether we like it or not, give us more and more leverage to affect the planet, to control the planet, to give us weather and climate control, not because we plan it, not because we want it, just because science delivers it to us bit by bit.
What is geoengineering?
It's really two very different things. One is ways that we would alter the amount of sunlight the Earth absorbs, and so cool the planet, partly offsetting the effects of carbon in the atmosphere, and that's called solar radiation management, or in some technocratic way, SRM. And the other one is to take carbon out of the atmosphere, so-called carbon dioxide removal.
Before we get on to solar radiation management, let me ask you about the carbon dioxide removal. A Royal Society report here in the United Kingdom back in 2009 said that no method of carbon dioxide removal has yet been demonstrated to be effective at an affordable cost with acceptable environmental impacts, and they only work to reduce temperatures over very long timescales.
I think that's exactly right, and I can say that both as an author of that report and as somebody running a startup company trying to capture CO2 from the air.
Before we get into the pros and cons of it, how solar radiation management might work.
Conceptually, it's simple. The doing it is not the hard part, but you could use aircraft or other methods to deliver literally tons or millions of tons of very small reflective aerosols, tiny particles, say, to the upper atmosphere.
Spraying them out at a high altitude.
Correct.
Isn't one of the problems with the climate and studying the climate is that it's incredibly difficult to know exactly how it works. It is very difficult to model.
Sure, it's impossible to know exactly, but you can still learn a lot. So we actually ran a survey almost a year ago now that took data, high quality data, from 1,000 people in the UK, Canada, and the US to try and understand public support for research on these technologies and what kind of political leanings influence people's decision to be for or against. And in fact, we found pretty broad support for research.
But that particular opinion survey that you're talking about, it also came up with the finding that 64% of subjects agree that humans should not be manipulating nature in the way suggested by solar radiation management.
Exactly.
Well, that would suggest that there isn't particularly broad support at the moment for the theory behind this.
There's not broad support for doing it, and I think that's quite a healthy thing. I mean, I'm one of the people who, maybe starting 20 years ago, most helped to open the door to get public conversation going on this thing.
How do you think, in that case, the public can be convinced, given that there is, as we saw with this project in Britain, tremendous skepticism, even about research at what you say is a very, very benign level?